or watch tonight's meeting in person at the George DeSierro City and County Buildings Council Chambers located at 1 Tacoma Drive, or watch live on Channel 8 and through live streaming on Broomfield's website. The public may also participate in public comment either in person or by calling 855-695-3744 and pressing *3 to be placed in the queue for comment. Please note that if you're calling in for public comment and would like to speak on more than one item on tonight's agenda, you'll need to press *3 each time to be placed back in the queue for comment. Public comment will be limited to 90 minutes total per item. The first 1 through 15 participants in the queue have 3 minutes to speak. The next 16 through 25 participants in the queue have 2 minutes to speak. And if time remains, the next 26 plus participants in the queue have 1.5 minutes to speak. Again, if joining virtually for public comment, the number is 855-695-3744 and press *3 to be placed in the queue. Screeners will ask callers for their first and last name, neighborhood, and the agenda item the caller would like to comment on. Please call several minutes before the agenda item and press *3 to ensure you're in the queue for comments. If joining in person, we'll ask you to come to the podium and state your name and neighborhood for the record. Before we call tonight's meeting to order, I would like to remind council and staff that when presenting or talking, please be sure that your microphone is turned on and to speak into the microphone. This will help ensure that the audio is clear for the public listening via Channel 8 and through live streaming. The council meeting is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Anderson. Here. Groom. Here. Hinkle. Here. Jezierski. Law Evans.
Here.
Lim.
Here.
Lindstedt.
Here.
Schaff.
Here.
Tessier.
A quorum is present. Will everyone please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
With allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In an effort to keep order for tonight's meeting, I ask council members to limit their comments to 5 minutes. Ms. Yelman will be assisting with the timekeeping. Additionally, please remember council's rules of procedure regarding conduct. It is important that we're prepared for meetings, keep an open mind, be respectful, and be mindful that we deliberate the issue, staying focused on the specific item topic, needing council's review and approval. We will plan on a 10-minute break at approximately 8 p.m. We will begin with council's review and approval of this evening's agenda. Council may add or remove items from the consent agenda, or council may revise the order of business for the meeting. Does any member of council have any comments or questions regarding this evening's agenda? Seeing none, are there any objections to this agenda being approved? Seeing none, this agenda is approved. There are no petitions or communications this evening. We will move to public comment next. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on matters other than the items already listed on this evening's agenda. As mentioned earlier, the public may comment both in person or via phone. If you're joining on the phone and want to be placed in the queue for comment, please call 855-695-3744 and press *3 to be placed in the queue. If you're joining in person, please line up behind the podium, and public comments will be limited to the time limits outlined earlier. We'll start with in-person public comment. If there's anyone who would like to be heard, please come to the podium and state your name and neighborhood for the record. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes. I don't see anyone online, so we're going to move on to council and community event updates. Does any member of council have an update this evening? Councilmember Schaaf?
Thank you, Mayor. So I just wanted to let the community know, coming up on Thursday, July 15th at 6 p.m., the 17th Judicial District Attorney Brian Mason will join Lotus Theater for a special presentation of Just Us, stories from the front lines of the criminal justice system. In this performance, District Attorney Brian Mason models civic hospitality and moral courage as he reads aloud and reflects upon Modus Justus Modilis Mobilis' story of systemic oppression and his insistence on transforming the brutality he was given as a DOC number into his own armor and influence. So it should be a very powerful evening performance. You can find more on Modus Theater's website and more tickets to that performance.
Thank you. Any other council member updates? Well, I have one. I attended the Bruner Farmhouse Advisory Committee's meeting yesterday because they were dedicating the Kindness Rocks Garden that was created by a local Girl Scout troop. And it reads, "Kindness is contagious." They collected and painted almost 800 pounds of rocks over the past year during the pandemic. And they painted inspirational messages and left some blank for visitors to take and write their own message. So they've officially dedicated the garden, and I just wanted to thank the Girl Scouts for their wonderful work. It was 4 of them, and it just shows you that kindness is contagious. So take a stroll by that garden. It's the 14th garden, and they're all maintained by volunteers. It really touches me that our youth are getting more involved with the historic places in Broomfield. So it kind of our past going into our future. So check that out. Thank you. Council's consideration of the consent agenda is next. Following the clerk's reading of consent agenda items 7A through 7G, we will ask for public comments. Will the clerk please read agenda items 7A through 7G by title?
Approval of minutes from regular meeting of June 22nd, 2021. Resolution number 2021-119, approving the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District SCFD funding allocations for 2021-2022 funding cycle. 7C, resolution number 2021-123, approving a trash, rubbish, garbage hauling license for Compost Colorado, doing business as COCO. 7D, designating voter service and polling place center and 24/7 ballot drop-off locations. 7E, resolution number 2021-122, approving an agreement between City and County of Broomfield and Kimley Horn and Associates for the design of Colorado State Highway 7 interim improvements. 7F, resolution number 2021-126, authorizing a consulting agreement with Burns and McDonnell Engineering Company, Inc. for the Broomfield Tanks preliminary design and feasibility report project. 7G, resolution number 2021-78, approving an intergovernmental agreement between the City and County of Broomfield and the Colorado Department of Transportation for the US 287 120th Avenue multi-model safety.
Thank you. We'll now proceed with public comments. Does any member of the public have comments on these agenda items? I don't see any online, so we'll move on. Does any member of council have comments on these agenda items? Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So tonight we have the annual opportunity to approve the SCFD funds, and it is an opportunity to thank the hard work of the Cultural Council for your time and energy in reviewing these numerous applications that come in for SCFD funding. But it's also an opportunity to thank each of the sales tax payers in the FCFD for contributing 1 penny on $10 for every purchase that you have. These collective dollars contribute over $60 million annually, supporting the vibrancy of our region and each county individually. The truly amazing piece of this is really how these dollars are then amplified. For instance, in 2019, 50 million people were served in the district, 4.3 million children engaged, 11,820 created sector jobs, $573 million in economic impact. And this is the truly amazing one. $1.9 billion with a B in economic activity. So again, thank you to the taxpayers of the district for supporting our cultural institutions, the thousands of jobs, the tourism, and the economic activity of our state. I do have a couple questions for the Cultural Council or Cultural Affairs staff. This year we had 34 organizations that applied, and I believe that we had 40 last year. And I was curious, what was the decrease of organizations, and did we lose any Broomfield-based organizations with that?
Thank you very much, Councilman. I want to state that the reason why we went from 40 to 34 organizations for last year was due to COVID. There was a decline in applications across the board for all of SCFD counties. Multi-county applications, organizations bringing programming to counties outside their counties that are located, simply decrease in terms of organizations, reducing their programming, staff, time, and due to uncertainty in planning and scheduling. In addition, any programs designed for in-school audiences found that coordinating with school districts was impossible due to the constantly changing health requirements during 2020. Many organizations have decreased capacity and are unable to extend to non-home county-based activities, and SCFD expects that future applications will return to normal once organizations rebound from 2020 and ideally with the post-COVID environment. And for your other question, Councilman, for if Broomfield lost any organizations here, we did not. Broomfield did not lose any GOS applicants, and we had less project applications, but this is reflected in the information data of the SCFD above. So.
And I see that we have some representatives from FCFD here. Thank you for being here. And actually, before I say that, I want to thank and give a big shout out to our FCFD board member, Suzanne Crawford. Thank you for your service on the board of directors. With the FCFD, I know that things are changing and things are becoming more normal. But with that, we see a lagging kind of recovery within the arts. For instance, Central City Opera, who usually performs all of their operas in repertoire up in the mountains, they're performing there at Hudson Gardens. So what kind of impacts to the arts industry are you seeing here within FCFD? And what are some of those ways in which the arts community is dealing with those changes and those challenges?
Thank you, Councilman Schaaf. So what we're seeing is when COVID first started, we saw a lot of furloughing and layoffs, and we see a significant rebound, a robust rebound. A lot of organizations and some of the regional institutions are now hiring. We're seeing a lot more activity in terms of our funding capacity. SCFD is actually seeing a whole lot improvement in terms of what we've been collecting. We are expecting a significant increase, and we did not do as bad as we had thought we were going to do in the 2020 fiscal year. So we see a lot of rebound. I think we're going to actually come out of this pretty good.
So you're saying that the sales taxes did not drop as significantly as we thought they would?
Not as we expected, no.
But we're seeing the impact on those individual arts organizations continuing to be a challenge.
Correct. I mean, we see a lot of rebound going, and organizations, they kind of tucked in. We see a lot more activity going on with the organizations now.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Any other council members? All right, before asking for a motion, I want to remind everyone that 7G is an intergovernmental agreement and requires 2/3 approval of council. Is there a motion that the recommendations contained in the staff reports for agenda items 7A through 7G be approved? Councilmember Schaaf.
So moved.
Is there a second? Councilmember Grimm.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. This evening, we have one resolution for the Board of Social Services review. The meeting of the Board of Social Services is called to order. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll for the Board of Social Services.
Anderson, here. Groom. Here. Hinkle, here. Jazdersky. Law Evans.
Here.
Lim,
Here.
Lindsted,
Here.
Schaff,
Here.
Tessier.
The quorum is present. Board members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. Dan Casey, Director of Human Services, will walk us through this item. Mr. Casey, back from vacation, looking refreshed and ready.
I'm not saying, good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. Dan Casey, I'm the Director of Human Services for City and County of Broomfield. And I'm here tonight just to walk through with you the proposed memorandum for the memorandum of understanding with the Colorado Department of Human Services for our Colorado Works, otherwise known as TANF, or Temporary Aid for Needy Families, and our Child Care Assistance Program. Proposed resolution 2021-118 would approve the MOU between Broomfield and the Colorado Department of Human Services for a period of July 1, 21 through June 30, 2024. You may wonder how that's possible when July 1st has already passed, but we're actually in good faith operating right now, hoping that you will approve this memorandum tonight. Just a quick overview. Our Temporary Aid for Needy Families program, or Colorado Works program, through the MOU, we're required to meet certain performance metrics, and the biggest one is our work performance. I'm going to start that over. Our work participation rate, WPR, as it's called in the memo. And I'm happy to announce that as of November of 2020, we were far above the required mark for that metrics. I think you guys all received the CSTAT information. You'll see entered employment, we're at about 38% right now. It's a cumulative running total. The goal is 37%. And actually earlier this year, we were at 40%. So the one required metrics that this MOU has, we are far exceeding. Also, child care, CCAP, as it's called, Child Care Assistance Program. We have been functioning with our Child Care Assistance Program for a long time. We've got multiple families involved in our CCAP program. And as you guys have heard me say at this podium previously, our CCAP, because of all of the COVID dollars and the COVID recovery dollars, our CCAP program has been pretty good this year. Our allocation went up to about $900,000, or just shy of $900,000. We've got several families participating, and that is to keep kids in quality care programs that is paid for. A portion of that care is paid for through CCAP. So that concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. We will now proceed with public comments. Does any member of the public have comments on this agenda item? We'll start with in person. And I'm not seeing any online, so questions from the board are next. Are there any comments or questions? I guess you've answered all of our questions, Mr. Casey.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is the Board of Social Services, consideration of proposed resolution 2021-118 BSS. Will the clerk please read proposed resolution number 2021-118 BSS by title?
Resolution number 2021-118 BSS, authorizing and approving a memorandum of understanding between the City and County of Broomfield and the Colorado Department of Human Services regarding the Colorado Works Program and the Colorado Child Care Assistance Program.
Is there a motion? Councilmember Schaaf?
Thank you, Mayor. I move that resolution number 2021-118 BSS be adopted.
Is there a second, Councilmember Grimm?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Seeing no further business before the Board of Social Services, the meeting is adjourned. This evening, we have the COVID-19 update for the Board of Health's review. The meeting of the Board of Health is called to order. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll for the Board of Health.
Anderson.
Here.
Groom.
Here.
Hinkle.
Here.
Ozerski. Law Evans.
Here.
Lamb,
Here.
Lindsted,
Here.
Shat,
Here.
Tessier.
A quorum is present. Board members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you again, Mayor Jason Bowling, Director of Public Health, will walk us through this item. We have transitioned, thankfully, from a weekly COVID update on Mondays. And we do foresee a continuing minimization of at least Jason's reports back, which is always due to and subject to change depending upon what that outcome looks like with the Delta variant and a whole host of other things. Welcome tonight, Mr. Bowling.
Thanks, Ms. Hoffman, and good evening, board members, board chair. Again, Jason Bowling here to provide the latest update on COVID-19. As you can see, the updates are becoming similar as we're going through this period of stabilization. Our hospitalizations and our deaths, primarily in the state and in nation, I should say, are occurring in those that are unvaccinated. So what we're knowing, what we see is that the vaccines do work, and they're protecting individuals. Secondly, we're seeing our cases are remaining stable in Broomfield. You can see our rates per 100,000 for 7-day incidents is staying below that 30, which is in that green level. And our positivity rate is extremely low at 2.2%. That means the virus isn't circulating as much in Broomfield. We're seeing this in the metro area as well. You can see how we're doing as far as our vaccination rates. Again, we're leading the state in both our total population that has received the vaccine and the eligible population. That's exciting. We're starting to see it level off as would be expected. We have reached the vast majority of people that were definitely interested in getting the vaccine, and those that we would consider to be vaccine hesitant, needed more information about side effects, about the health aspects and so forth. Really now we're getting into a point of working with those that may be in pre-contemplation, not really thinking about the vaccine yet, but moving to that place of contemplation based on information they may receive. Lastly, what we're hearing and what we know is the Delta variant is becoming the predominant strain in the US. We know it is the predominant strain here in Colorado. We're seeing the vast majority of the Delta variant cases occurring in counties that have low vaccination rates. I think that's important for us to remember because not all of our populations have been vaccinated yet. So again, our children are unvaccinated, and as we head into the fall season in school, that is one concern we have about the Delta variant and those kids that haven't had a chance to be vaccinated yet. We do have one confirmed case in Broomfield. That's not to be unexpected, given that it is the predominant strain. But the guidance I give everybody is I would assume if you're in contact with somebody that has COVID or contracting COVID, it's most likely going to be the Delta variant at this point in time. And then lastly, just where we stand on our current status, our public health order is still in place. We're in level clear. We'll keep that in place through August 16th. If all things continue along this trajectory, we'll most likely let that public health order expire and just move back to normal. Governor Polis, as most people saw through the news, announced that he was ending the health emergency orders. He did keep some orders in place, executive orders for recovery efforts. There is still a state public health order for face coverings from unvaccinated individuals. The key thing is they removed schools from this, and so what is left is healthcare, medical, and congregate settings. And lastly, the CDC last Friday issued their guidance for schools for this upcoming fall season, both for mitigation strategies and also for masks. We're closely watching that. We're also awaiting the state health department to release their guidance. And from there, we'll be partnering closely with our school districts. There is a strong desire, I would think, or what I should say, I know from most school districts of what can we do to keep kids in school. So as much of these mitigation efforts that we can keep in place, hopefully we don't have nearly as many quarantines that we had during the last 2 semesters of school. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Director Bowling. We'll now proceed with public comments. Does any member of the public have comments on this agenda item? We'll start with in-person public comment. And if there's anyone who'd like to be heard, please come to the podium, state your name, neighborhood for the record. And you have 3 minutes. I'm not seeing any online either. So we'll move on to questions from the board. Are there any comments or questions? Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jason, for coming tonight. I've always appreciated your work and the team's work. You know, this is clearly not over. You know, it's hard to read when they say the pandemic is over. And I will say that there's just a lot of anxiety amongst elementary school parents. You know, they hear from the CDC one thing, and then, you know, schools might turn around in another county and do another. I think what gives me the most heartburn is knowing that we were on the calls with the governor a lot. And on those calls, we could see CDPHE showing us the different models. You know, showing us, hey, this is what's going to happen in hospital beds if we don't use masks. This is what's going to happen in hospital beds if we don't have this 6-foot distance. So there was a lot of mitigation predictions that we had, and we had the data to back it up. What does that look like for students, though, for children, particularly under the age 11 and under until, you know, at least preschool age, to look at that data? Because I imagine that their hospital beds, like, that's not going to be, you know, a huge, you know, dependent variable, right? So what are the dependent variables? Are we looking at the R0, you know, transmission rate? Are we looking at long haulers? Are we looking at those, you know, those predictions? So what, do they have any graphs? Have they come out with any predictions in those models? And what does that look like?
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember Grimm. I mean, Henkel, I apologize.
That's
I was
okay.
looking at Councilmember. Yes, the School of Public Health is still doing the modeling data for us, thankfully. What we do know is that severity of cases, even with the variants, is more likely to occur in the older populations. But by older populations, we're now seeing cases in people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that are having to go in and be intubated potentially, or need treatment. So as far as modeling and thinking ahead, we don't see the severity with that age group, but we can potentially see that level of transmission that is occurring. And the concern there is, we know the vaccines are extremely effective, but there's still a potential for breakthrough cases. Extremely rare, but can still happen. So as much as we can mitigate the viruses and the virus in school, potential exposure to the Delta variant, and ultimately that involves looking at masks, looking at ventilation, looking at distancing still, hands, hygiene, washing, again, not going in if you're sick. All of those mitigation layered measures are important as we build in also testing and isolation of those individuals. I think when we're talking about quarantines, last year we were at a place where we were quarantining a significant amount of people that were potentially exposed. We're looking at what does that look like as far as close contact within 3 to 6 feet. And if you're both wearing masks at that age group, you really need to have both individuals out of school through a quarantine. So those are the discussions we're having.
Yeah, thank you. I also look forward to seeing if testing has changed so that we could have, you know, maybe quicker tests, or, you know, what that looks like before, you know, they start showing symptoms. So I do look forward to that, because I don't, I have always felt that actually the younger kids, outside of our red zone, right? They should be in school with their masks on. And I think, with all the mitigation measures that they could do. And then, on top of that though, the quarantine was hard. My son went to a private school the whole year and they had maybe 6 to 8 cases. And so very small amount of quarantine. They had a lot of money though to put those mitigations in place, like a $200,000, bipolar ionization system, which is great, but public schools can't afford that. Whereas my middle school daughter goes to public school and she was in quarantine twice. So she missed a good amount of school within even just 2 months that she was back in school. So I do look forward to that conversation because I think, if we can just ensure that our kids do not pass this at school and that they're healthy and that they're safe, that I think it's healthy for them to go to school and take precautions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Law Evan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Bowling, for your report. I guess my questions are a little more on the other end of the scale than Councilmember Hinkle's. As I understand it, in the United States, we are still operating under the emergency use authorization for all the vaccinations. And there was a question that came up recently, kind of in my circle of friends, as to if the FDA is still working on, I don't know what to call it, the normal, the everyday, the regular approval, the non-emergency use approval. Where does that stand? Do we, because that puts us into some different requirements, I understand, for example, with the military and other groups where the military can be mandated to have to take the vaccination at that point. Can you give us any insight on that?
Yeah, Councilmember Law Evans, you're exactly right. With all 3 vaccines, they're still operating under that emergency use authorization. And that's allowed obviously during a crisis like this. I believe Pfizer is the one company that has submitted data to have formal approval of their vaccine. So that formal authorization process, we assume that Moderna and Johnson & Johnson will be following shortly thereafter. So hopefully in the near future, we'll see that we're moving away from this emergency authorization to full authorization of the vaccines, given we have basically a longitudinal study going on right now with our population that's been vaccinated and what we're seeing with the results.
Right. And along those lines, then is the approvals for children under 12, is that something that's still being pursued or, okay, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so those clinical trials are underway with the pharmaceutical companies. They're all in various stages as far as where they're at in those specific clinical trials. What we've heard through our circles is they hope to submit the data early in the fall to the FDA for review and approval for under age 12. And so hopefully we'll be at a place where our younger kids don't have to wait long to have access to those vaccines.
Right. From what I've been able to, it's so easy to get lost in weird conspiracy theories on the internet these days, in anything, right? In absolutely anything. You can get lost in a weird conspiracy theory about whether or not mammals should breathe air, kind of thing. But it does seem like the 3 vaccines that have emergency use approval in the United States are all very, very safe, that we're not seeing some of the dire predictions people were talking about, and the whole thing that it makes you magnetic or something like that. That's just someone messing with you.
Yeah.
But they're very, very safe.
You're correct, extremely safe. And if you want to see lively debates, watch one of the advisory committee on immunization practices meetings where they discuss these vaccines and discuss the safety and effectiveness of them. And they do obviously have positions, and they weigh the pros and cons of the vaccines. And out of all of those meetings, overwhelmingly, they have found the vaccines to be safe. And in those instances where there have been side effects that have been reported through the reporting system. As should be expected, the CDC's and the advisory committee on immunization practices reviews that data and takes it very seriously. What they have found overwhelmingly with that is it's an education point, but given the risk is so small, and the benefits are so enormous that to continue to recommend that everybody get the vaccines.
Yeah, okay. And then my last question is, as our economy continues to recover and as travel begins to open up more, and I for one am starved for travel. I'm like, let's go somewhere. I don't care where, let's go somewhere. But as my family is occasionally considers international travel, and those documentation requirements are all over the board, no matter where you go, it's all different. So realizing that this is a very touchy political topic, is there any more progress within the state or at the national level towards some sort of a easily accessible, and I use that term very carefully because I have access to the state database by phone, and it's not easily accessible. An easily accessible verification database of some sort, so that these people who are going out and buying forged cards and things like that, so we can avoid that sort of a situation, that sort of spread.
Yeah, so my understanding is both the federal government and the state are both working on how do you access your vaccine information, so that it becomes more of a portal where you have access to it versus having to go through this whole phone tree system and emails, like you explained. It could be very complex, and I just had to go through it when I did some recent travel myself, and so got firsthand experience with that. The second thing that I know is been debated quite a bit is the vaccine passports, or how do you prove that you actually have the vaccine. I haven't received any additional updates on where the state stands with that, or where the federal government stands with it. And so if I do hear that information, I'll make sure to include it in the follow-up response.
Okay, I appreciate it. Yeah, just my personal pet peeve on the phone tree system. Those of us who, in hindsight, made a very unwise choice 34 years ago to hyphenate my last name. It's a nightmare. When nobody knows where to alphabetize you. Is there a space? Is there a hyphen? Are they together? What is your last name? It's stupid. So on that high note, thank you very much for the information. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And my questions are actually along the lines of what you've just covered, and I'm still submerged in the parents with younger children who still need to be vaccinated under 12. And so I appreciate that update, and we were kind of hoping that those vaccinations would be available going prior to the school year, but it sounds like it might be kind of pushing the limit there. So I guess I just have an additional question on top of the discussion you already had on with the school districts as we learn more about what they're going to be doing to keep these kids safe. Do we have any indication from our local school districts about enrollment? And we've already been having to make those decisions as parents, like deciding, do we want to do, I'm saying in person for all my kids. Like I just remember as I'm talking to the parents, we just, you got to go with that faith that there's going to be that program in place. And if we're not feeling safe, we will speak up. But are you seeing any data from the schools yet on how many are saying that, no, I'm going to continue, too afraid, the concerns are too great to put their kids back in school and just choosing virtual enrollment?
Yeah, Councilmember Anderson, I have not heard that from both Adams 12 or Boulder Valley School District, but I'd be happy to follow up on that specific point.
That would be great. And then also, that discussion with the schools to make sure, like, whatever we can do in the messaging to make sure that this isn't going to be a free for all to go back into school, that they're assuming there will be protocols in place to keep our kids safe as we wait. But I'd appreciate any additional work there and information. And that's all my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess just one other piece I would add is we had a presentation from the School of Public Health, and both CU and CSU experts when it comes to ventilation. And with all of the investments that have been made for mitigating COVID, quite a few of the school districts are looking at investing in these ventilation systems that not only address COVID, but hopefully address other communicable diseases as we move forward in respiratory diseases. They're finding that might be as effective a strategy is actually wearing masks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the Board of Health? All right, seeing no further business before the Board of Health, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Director Bolling. And there is no business before the Broomfield Housing Authority this evening. Our first item under council business this evening is the public hearing and council's consideration on second and final reading of proposed ordinance number 2150, amending the Broomfield Municipal Code relating to maximum potential term of imprisonment. I'll now declare the public hearing open. We'll follow the city's standard public hearing procedures. First, staff will present a summary of the proposal. Next, we'll have the applicant's presentation, if applicable. Then we'll ask for public comments and final comments from the applicant. Finally, questions from the council members. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor. Christina Pena Helm will walk us through this item, and she is a senior city county attorney.
Thank you, and I do have a slideshow to present as well. Next slide, please. Ordinance 2150 was approved on first reading back in June 22nd. The ordinance amends the general penalty that's found in the Broomfield Municipal Code for a person that is convicted of an unlawful act under the Broomfield Municipal Code. Currently, the general penalty imposed under the code is a fine of $2,650 or imprisonment not exceeding 1 year, or both. What ordinance 2150 does is amends that provision of the code by reducing the potential maximum term of imprisonment from 1 year to 364 days. Next slide. Ordinance 2150 does align with Colorado statute, and specifically section 1310 113 1A. Under that statute, a person who is convicted of violating a municipal ordinance in a municipal court may be incarcerated by a period not to exceed 364 days. That statute was last amended by a House bill that was passed in August of 2019. And in that amendment, the maximum penalty, as I just stated, was reduced from 1 year to 364 days. Next slide. And for additional information for the council, there are at least 35 other cities in Colorado that do have this similar provisions to what ordinance 2150 says, meaning that their max penalty is 364 days rather than 1 year. Those cities include surrounding cities listed here, including Boulder, Westminster, Thornton, cities that surround Broomfield. And also for additional information for the council, I did collect some data from the Broomfield Municipal Court, and generally, defendants in the municipal court are not sentenced to jail time for municipal code violations. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Pena-Helm. We'll now proceed with public comments. Does any member of the public have comments on this agenda item, starting with the in-person public? If you would like to comment, come up to the podium. And I'm not seeing any online, so questions from City Council are next. Members should limit themselves to questions during this portion. The time to introduce amendments and state positions for or against this item is later. Are there any questions? All right. There being no further questions, the public hearing is closed. Next is council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2150. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2150 by title?
Ordinance number 2150, amending section 1-12-020 of Broomfield Municipal Code to reduce to 364 days the maximum potential term of imprisonment, second and final reading.
Is there a motion by a council member? Councilmember Lenskat?
Thank you, Mayor. I move that ordinance number 2150 be adopted on second and final reading, ordered, published in full.
Is there a second? Councilmember Schaaf?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Our next item under council business this evening is the public hearing and council's consideration on second and final reading of proposed ordinance number 2155, adding a ballot question to the November 2nd ballot regarding ranked choice voting for Broomfield municipal elections. I'll now declare the public hearing open. We'll follow the city's standard public hearing procedures as previously outlined. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Again, thank you, Mayor. Todd Davidson, our Manager of Elections, will walk us through this item. Todd?
Thank you, Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Todd Davidson, Elections Manager. Tonight, you're considering ordinance 2155, which would place a question on the November ballot, allowing Broomfield the Broomfield electors to choose whether or not to use ranked choice voting in municipal elections going forward. This is the second and final reading of 2155 and the public hearing. Recent legislation will decrease the cost for Broomfield to implement ranked choice voting should the electors vote to utilize the ranked choice method. As you recall from previous presentations in April and January, ranked choice voting works. In a ranked choice voting race, the candidate which receives the fewest number of votes is eliminated in the first round, and instant runoff rounds then proceed until one of the candidates receives a majority of the votes in the final round. I'm available for any questions, but that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you for your brevity. We'll now proceed with public comments. Does any member of the public have comments on this agenda item? Come up to the podium, please. State your name and neighborhood for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Tom Alley. I live in the Anson Highland neighborhood in Ward 4. And I just want to say thank you to the council for your willingness to put this measure on ranked choice voting on the ballot for consideration for Broomfield voters. In my view, RCV is a great opportunity to do a big improvement to our democracy by implementing an election system that allows voters to more fully express their preference and more closely measures the majority preference. As opposed to our first past the post system, which can unfortunately allow candidates to win with a minority preference. For example, in a three-way race, a person with as low as 34% perhaps can win, and that is not representative of the majority. RCV will bring a majority mandate to the winner, and in other cities where it has been implemented, we're seeing increased choices of candidates, increased representation of minority groups and women. And note that improving our democracy starts at the local level, and I urge a positive vote to put it on the ballot. I'm excited that Broomfield can be a leader in the state for considering RCV locally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emma Donahue. I'm the political director for Ranked Choice Voting for Colorado. I unfortunately do not live in Broomfield, so I don't have a neighborhood. Thank you so much for the City Council for moving this measure forward. As Tom said earlier, this ranked choice voting allows more voice for the community. It prevents vote splitting and allows more participation in their voting system. It also makes sure that we're getting a majority winner in our city council elections so that you candidates come in knowing that they have the mandate from the community to lead, which is very important. We're excited to have Broomfield join Boulder, who will start using this for their mayoral candidates in 2023, along with other cities who are looking at this as well, as Fort Collins and Denver have also moving towards this system. We're very excited about state legislation, House Bill 21-1071 this year, that will help cover some of the costs and some of the compliance around this new system for Broomfield and make this a system that it can work for everybody here. So thank you so much for moving ranked choice voting forward, and hopefully we'll have a strong vote tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is public comment from individuals joining via phone. Please press *3, state your first and last name and neighborhood for the record, and we do have one caller in the queue. Mike Shelton, you're up.
Hey, thanks, Mayor and Council, and, oh, I just heard a beep. Thanks, Mayor and
Hey,
Council.
Mike, you
I
have,
appreciate you taking my call. Great. I can't be there tonight, but thank you for taking my call. I do support ranked choice voting, and I'm really excited that it's on the ballot. When I was on City Council, I learned about it and I started supporting it, and I think Devin Schaff really pushed it through. So thanks a lot for that work. I think there is some work to educate the community. So knowing those people that just spoke is going to be key, and I think they will do a lot of work. And I think the voters are really going to like that change too. Ranking your choices is something that we do every day, and I think it'll be. I think the voters will really receive that well. So thanks a lot and good luck.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other public comments. Oh, did you want to speak, sir? Oh, never mind. All right. Questions from the City Council are next. Members should limit themselves to questions during this portion, and the time to introduce amendments and state positions for or against this item is later. Are there any council questions? All right, will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2155 by title?
Ordinance number 2155, providing for the submission of a ballot question to the registered electors at the November 2nd, 2021 coordinated election concerning the use of ranked voting method, instant runoff voting, to elect future mayors and council members of the city and county of Broomfield. Second and final reading.
Is there a motion? Councilmember Schaaf?
Thank you, Mayor. I move that ordinance number 2155 be adopted on second and final reading and order published by title.
Is there a second? Councilmember Lavin?
In honor of Mike Shelton, second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll? Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor. We don't have to do the roll because we're not virtual. All in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Our next item under council business this evening is council's consideration on first reading of the proposed ordinance number 2157, authorizing the issuance of water revenue bonds. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you once again, Mayor. Brenda Ritchie, our CFO, is going to present this item. David Allen is also Assistant City County Manager, is here for backup and support. First, we want to thank council for this journey that we've been on with regards to debt and Windy Gap and financing 101, 201, 301. And then the specifics, it's a lot of time outside of your regular staffing, if you will, to understand these complex issues. So we are grateful for all of you, particularly with the 2-on-1s that Brenda and David were able to do with each one of you. So thank you very much. Ms. Ritchie.
Thank you, City Manager Hoffman, and good evening, Brenda Ritchie, CFO, here at City and County of Broomfield. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. After 20-some years, staff is pleased to present the first reading of the bond ordinance authorizing the issuance of the water revenue bonds, which will secure the funding for the construction of the Windy Gap Burning Project. Next slide, please. So since 2000, staff, along with council, along the way, have recognized the need to provide and secure a dedicated water source to Broomfield, not only now, but in the future. And so as a result, Broomfield, along with 11 other participants and other entities, committed to participating in the Windy Gap Burning Project, which would construct a new 90,000 acre-foot water reservoir. The total cost of the Burning project is estimated at $600 million. And based on Broomfield's anticipated share of the water storage, we're requesting to finance approximately $177 million for the project, which is proportional to the water shares Broomfield would receive. The investment would meet Broomfield's projected water demands at build out and support an additional 11,000 water license for its supply. The project has not only been part of Broomfield's comprehensive and long-range plans, but it's also an ongoing city council priority. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, this project is an investment and it's not a new concept. It's one that our predecessors had the foresight to envision by programming into our capital program as a planned expenditure. One of the current staff has really built on that model and focused our efforts on conversations and our approach methodology to really define and develop sound fiscal strategies just to ensure not only the health of the system, but the water fund itself. The first step was really formalizing a debt policy that council recently adopted that guides not only the council, but also staff, and determining that the market conditions are appropriate to ensure when we should be seeking debt financing. The proposed debt ordinance supports and secures the funding in order to provide and meet, again, Broomfield's needs as we are moving towards build out. The other mechanism that we've planned is an outside consultant to come in and provide an in-depth analysis of our current rates, fees, and charges to confirm its ability to support the various utilities on an ongoing basis, including the operating and maintenance expenses and the repayment associated with any debt financing through a utility rate study. So now, while that utility rate study is not required for the financing of this project, because the current rates that we have programmed in our models and worked with our financial advisors to review for the water system, they're projected to be sufficient to support the anticipated bond payments that you'll see here in a couple of slides. But Broomfield is really proactively seeking this information, really to maintain its financial health in all three utilities, which, as a reminder, is the water, sewer, and water reclamation. Next slide, please. So what exactly is Broomfield obligating ourselves to financially with this commitment? In previous discussions with City Council, staff outlined various options for financing related to term and annual payments, and that's based on current market conditions and rates. So this slide highlights the results of those discussions and recommendations to pursue debt service for a 25-year term at an interest rate of 2.58. And that's, again, anticipated could potentially change. It will all depend on when we close on the bonds. And so with that annual payment of approximately $9 million for a total all-in cost of principal and interest of $225 million at the end of the 25 years. It was also determined that defeasing the 2012 water revenue bonds, which means what we're doing is setting aside the 11.2 that we roughly have due, that are due, will be paid off by the end of next year into an escrow account. And so that would just eliminate any potential issues of issuing the new bonds by separating those funds into an escrow account for a timely payment. Now, the current debt service coverage ratio also includes tap fees, which was part of the analysis and financial support of the system and proposed debt. Our current model and projections do note that without those fees, at build out, that coverage ratio will still reach 1. It's just a gradual process. So over the years, there may be times, same thing with our revenues, where building may occur in certain years and expenses may be higher or lower. So that ratio will change on a year-to-year basis. But as we approach the end of the term, we'll definitely approach that 1. So it builds and helps diversify that revenue stream, and it also provides an overall picture for our investors as well, interested in knowing our total revenues as well as expenditures. So it's our long-term strategy coupled with the rate study is to gradually increase that ratio over the life cycle of the debt, so that we can confidently approach that ratio being over 1. Next slide, please. So now that we've covered what we're paying for, it's really important to understand how Broomfield plans on paying for this debt. Since Broomfield has historically anticipated this project, it's been programmed in on an annual debt service payment in our capital improvement projects plan. It's in our long-range plan of approximately $10 million. So those annual debt service payments will be paid directly from the Water Enterprise Fund, and primarily through license and tap fees, which are used to support new growth projects and programmed again in our long-range plans. There's also the ability to support that through our customer usage charges after any existing payments have been made. So if we have obligation or expenses related to operations, maintenance, those will be paid first, and that's what comes into your net pledged revenue. So it's a secondary contingency, if you will, to cover those available funds to put towards any debt obligations. And those are outlined in the bond documents as well. So this strategy, methodology really set the priority that existing customers are taken care of through the operations and maintenance by protecting their access to water in the future. And new development also adds to that value by allowing that customer base to grow, because we switch from new license fees to then becoming users of the system. And so that just translates into a different revenue system. And it strengthens, again, not only the viability, but also our financial stability and flexibility. Next slide, please. So the packet this evening contains a number of important documents, very lengthy, and but they all support the ordinance that's authorizing the issuance of the bond request for the water revenue bonds to support the construction and participation in the Windy Gap Permit project. So just to kind of outline, this slide here really just goes over the various documents that were part of the packet. We've got the escrow agreement, which outlines how the funds related to those 2012 water bonds. Again, it's really how those bonds will be deposited in the bank, and then how the bank will then make those payments so that they will be paid off by the end of next year. Again, is to keep it clean. The next agreement is regarding the paying agent, which essentially authorizes the bank to make those payments respective to those bondholders for the new debt obligation. And then we've got the preliminary offering statement, which is the bulk of the packet. It's used by the underwriter of the market to really market and sell the bonds to potential investors. It's not only an overview of the project itself, but it really gives a glimpse into Broomfield as a whole, as a community, what our interests are, where our strengths are, employers, that kind of demographics, if you will, to give a really overview of Broomfield as a community. And so the terms and conditions related to the underwriting of those bonds are found in the bond purchasing agreement. And the remaining packet is the continuing disclosure certificate, which outlines Broomfield's transparency requirements after bond issuance. So all of the bond documents that are put together here are really just outlining how are the bonds purchased, how are they sold, how are they paid. Which brings us to our next slide, please, and final slide. So after tonight, staff will continue to work with our external partners to review the documents to ensure that everything is in order, and also finalize the interest ratings as we work with Moody's on issuing that credit rating agency. We'll come back to council for consideration and final adoption of the bond ordinance on August 10th. And then move into with anticipated sale and closing of those bonds on September 17th. So staff is really requesting and recommending the ordinance 2157 be adopted on first reading and published this evening. That concludes staff's summary.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive and easy to understand overview, Ms. Ritchie. We'll now proceed with public comments. Does any member of the public have comments on this agenda item? And we'll start with in-person public comment. If there's anyone that would like to speak, come up to the podium. Yes, Mr. Robinson.
My name is Marty Robinson. I live in the Anthem Ranch community, retirement committee on the north end of Broomfield with 1,334 doors now, fully built out. I've been there 14 years, actively involved in the community, more in a political sense, as people know. And so I'm always trying to gauge the sentiments of our neighbors. We recently reinstituted our men's coffee, which had been shut down for about a year and a half, which was a great place to talk about local things and other things. And I kind of gauge people's sentiment. I spoke to one very knowledgeable fellow on our table, and I explained a few of the issues going on in Broomfield. And, you know, after I went through a whole diatribe there, as you know, and after it was all over, the guy says, well, what will this all do to my taxes? And so I would, you know, say that at least in those 1,334 doors, he's pretty representative. And I would characterize the members of our community as rich but cheap. relatively wealthy but cheap, you know, they're all successful, but mostly a lot of professional people, well accomplished, who've done well in life, and, you know, we're not a, you know, a luxurious neighborhood, but the people there are, like I say, they're wealthy but cheap. So I would encourage you to be very careful about communicating to the community. I think this is a great project. It's an ideal time with low interest rates to finance a major project for the city. I'm a big backer of the city, as people know, and I always say to people, I think you underestimate how many people that live here. I think our build out estimates are very low. We build a beautiful place. People are going to come whether you like it or not. You have to find a way to accommodate them. And we may need a lot more water than you have estimated, if that's the case. And so this is a great project. So just general comments really, but I would, I can assure you that our neighborhood people don't like mill rate increases if that's what you're considering. And that would be a definite to get this thing passed. And we have to work hard to get people to spend, you know, long-term debt. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to comment in person? And I don't see anyone online, so questions from city council are next. Members should limit themselves to questions during this portion. The time to introduce amendments and state positions for or against is later. Are there any questions? Councilmember Law Evans.
So I think given Mr. Robinson's comments, it's a pretty fair question to ask so that he and his neighborhood know at this point in time, is there a mill rate levy increase contemplated?
Thank you, Councilmember Law Evans, and good to see you, Mr. Robinson. It's been a long time. You look well. We are not contemplating a mill levy increase. In fact, whether it be property taxes or sales taxes, that is not how you fund enterprise water projects. There's many other things that we can have conversations about that mill levies, property taxes, and sales taxes fund. This is not one of those projects.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Groom.
I just have a comment and a thank you specifically to Mr. David Allen. He's been with this program for Broomfield for many years and been the backbone to bring this to where it's at today. And a lot of other staff members also, I don't want to forget them. So I know it's one of the largest, and correct me if I'm wrong, debt services that Broomfield's ever engaged in. So it's a little scary being on this side of it, signing the debt. But I do support it, and I know it's been a long haul. So thank you to staff and sticking through it for all these years. I know it's been a long time. So thank you, and thank you, David, Mr. Allen.
Councilmember Lim.
Thank you. When we did our 2-on-1s, I was in, I think, the first set. There was still contemplation of whether the loan should be, or the bond should be issued for 20 or 25 years. So can you go through the process of that decision now that we can see that it was 25 years?
Sure, thank you for the opportunity, Councilmember Lynn, to answer that. So we did look at a term of 20, 25 years and 30 years. And based on, there was a minimal amount difference between the 20-year and 25. So there was an additional 1.5 million in savings to extend for 5 years on an annual basis. So based on that determination, it allowed for flexibility within the water fund program should we find ourselves with other projects, because again, we need to look at the total system in place and not just from the gap in support of the water enterprise system. So in making that determination, it was determined that it allowed for greater flexibility in the event that revenue shortfalls may not come in, in terms of the projections of where we have them. So it allowed for that contingency, if you will. So that's how the determination was made, because again, it capitalized on that annual $1.5 million savings.
Okay, thank you. Did the rest of the Windy Gap Farming Project participants issue their group bonds yet?
Councilmember Lynn. Good evening, everyone. David Allen, Assistant City County Manager. The Northern Water is still in the process of issuing their debt. They're on track, I think, either to close either late July or early August. And then there's two other entities, Longmont and Loveland, who are also issuing independent debt, much like Broomfield, and they are also on that same time schedule.
Okay, so we're all on the same track and we're all set to be on the same, path. So this project will be able to go forward with everyone finishing their part then.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I guess the only other question is, could you, this is for the water, our water usage in particular, we've had a lot of residents write recently about what we do to conserve water in Broomfield. And I guess this seemed like an appropriate time maybe to bring that up in the fact that we are expending a lot of funds in order to increase our water usage for basically an increase in population. But at the same time, residents have written to say, we really need to be conserving water. So could you address any of the ways that we are currently doing that or plan to do so in the future?
Sure. Great question, Councilmember Lynn. Broomfield has an approved water efficiency plan. It was formerly called the Water Conservation Plan, and all entities that have water demands that are, I believe it's more than 2,000 acre feet of use per year are required by the state to have a water efficiency plan. Broomfield's annual demands in aggregate are about 16,000 acre feet per year. Just to put it in perspective in terms of where we land with the state requirements. Of that 16,000 acre feet, about 3,000 acre feet per year comes or supplied by our non-potable reuse system. And then the remaining 13,000 acre feet makes up our drinking water supply, which is the majority of the customers that we have on the commercial and residential side. So in terms of our water efficiency plan, we have a kind of a multifaceted approach for that. We have an overall goal of reducing our demands by 20% with that plan. And really the keystone of that plan, if you will, is really continued expansion and reliance on the non-potable irrigation system. So as a system as a whole, that's really the bulk of what we're looking at. But then in addition to that, we also have a lot of other programs and approaches that are intended to further conserve water. And so some of those include rebate programs that we have for either replacing water fixtures like toilets. We also have a rebate program for those that want to purchase smart water or irrigation controllers for their homes. We also provide services at no cost to residents and commercial customers to do water audits, and those are water audits that are both done indoors and outdoors. And then lastly, we also have code requirements related to water conservation, particularly as they pertain to residential development. So we have limitations on the coverage of sod of the total landscape area that's required for every new single family home. And so it's kind of a combination of all of those that's going to support our 20% reduction as outlined in our water efficiency plan.
Thank you for addressing that.
David, Mayor, excuse me just for a moment. So council's well versed now that we've been through the 211s, but for those that aren't, could you define non-potable water, please, David?
So non-potable water is not suitable for drinking. What we do is the source of supply comes from recapturing the wastewater that folks flush down the toilet. We capture that at the wastewater treatment plant and then have additional treatment of that water beyond what's required as part of our discharge permit in our wastewater plant. We'll do some additional filtration. We pump that water up to Great Western Reservoir throughout the fall, winter, and early spring. And then when the irrigation systems come on, we use that source of supply to irrigate large parts and the bulk of the Interlochen / Flatiron Mall area. So we have a lot of non-potable, what we'll call non-potable irrigation that makes up that demand. And the real key there is that because of that system, that reduces the amount of
other supplies that we need to develop that would normally come through the drinking water system. So it's not only the supplies that we don't have to make up for, but also the capacity in the system. So as we think about our water treatment plant, we don't have to have as much capacity that water treatment plant and pay that capital expense and have those operating expenses, because we're able to reduce our total demand on the system through the non-potable irrigation system.
Great answer. Any other council member questions? We move on. All right, next is council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2157 on first reading. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2157 by title?
Ordinance number 2157, authorizing the issuance of water revenue bonds, series 2021, first reading.
Is there a motion? Councilmember Broome?
I move that ordinance number 2157 be adopted on first reading and ordered published in full. And that a public hearing be held on August 10th, 2021, as allowed by City Council procedures and rules of order. And that a second and final reading of ordinance number 2157 be scheduled for August 10th, 2021, following the public hearing.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Henkel?
Second.
Do we have a voice vote on this or no? It's just an all in favor? It's the amendment language that's in my own way. So, all in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. The final item under council business this evening is the appointment of a council member for the current Ward 5 vacancy. At the June 22nd, 2021 council meeting, council appointed a new mayor to fill the vacancy created by former Mayor Quinn's resignation. I was selected by council to complete a vacant term and resign my position as a Ward 5 council member, creating a vacancy in that position. The charter provides that council shall vote to fill this vacancy within 30 days, but the specific details as to the procedure to use is not set forth in Broomfield's governing documents. This evening, we will use a similar process of what was used for the mayor appointment at the June 22nd council meeting and what is used to fill vacant board and commission seats. The city received 3 applications by the stated deadline from duly qualified individuals, David Beacom, Todd Cohen, and John Ewald. In accordance with the procedures set forth in section 6.1 of council's procedures and rules of order, the process tonight will be as follows. Nominees will be identified. If the number of nominees does not exceed the number of vacancies, council will proceed directly with a motion to appoint. If the number of nominees exceeds the number of vacancies, council will proceed to vote by saying the name of the individual they want elected as council member for the Ward 5 vacancy when the clerk calls their name. Following the vote, a motion to appoint the candidate by name will be necessary. Are there any nominations? And as a reminder, nominations do not require a second. Councilmember Broome?
I nominate David Beacom.
Are there any other nominations? Councilmember Henkel?
I nominate Todd Cohen.
Any other nominations? Councilmember Law Evans?
Thank you. I nominate John Ewald. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing that those are the only 37. Seeing no further nominations, we will proceed to public comment. Does any member of the public have comments on this agenda item? We'll start with in-person public comment. And this is not an opportunity for nominees to speak to council, rather, it's a chance for the public to provide comment on this specific item. If there's anyone who would like to be heard, please come to the podium, state your name and neighborhood for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. I live in your neighborhood, the Broadwoods. A common refrain among activist groups associated with several of our council members and the current mayor is, "This is what democracy looks like." They often shout this as they're disrupting public meetings or demonstrating on public property without a permit. What we are witnessing tonight is anything but what a representative democracy should look like. We're watching a small group of political elites manipulating for their own political gain the future of Broomfield's leadership. What do I mean? Now Mayor Castriota, with lofty political aspirations, won the Ward 5 seat by a plurality in 2017, yet has now been appointed to the only Broomfield at-large office on the council. In other words, a politician who failed to earn the majority vote in 1/5 of Broomfield is now the only city and countywide elected official. But they're not done yet. Tonight, this council, with their established history of political paybacks and favoritism, are poised to appoint another of their political allies to the Ward 5 vacancy, having never earned a single vote from residents. It reminds me of when they rewarded their campaign supporter, Mike Foote, with a taxpayer-funded position after they failed to appoint him as city and county attorney. Former Mayor Quinn, while I wished him a long and healthy retirement, was complicit in this corrupt behavior. Quinn started this sequence of events with the announcement of his resignation 12 days and 17 days after a deadline which a special election would have been necessary. By doing so, he robbed the people of Broomfield their voice with those 17 days. Mayor Quinn had already been playing the dirty political game for some time. Last fall, when CPR reporter Ben Marcus sent a quorum request seeking information regarding the relationship between our appointed clerk and reporter and the quote, political neophyte Secretary of State, City and County Manager Hoffman quickly connected the dots. And once again, I quote, CPR called the mayor called me. They were looking for this message because they knew Jenny Griswold's brother was Pat Quinn's campaign manager. While partisans take to the pages of a local newspaper calling anyone pointing out these glaring abuses negative or backwards, on the contrary, I argue those who speak up against corruption possess the courage needed to have a clean government free from this type of backroom political gimmicks. Finally, to anyone supporting this malarkey, you may like the personalities involved. You may support them politically. However, Broomfield voters are much smarter than you're giving them credit for with these antics, and they're paying attention. Apparently, this is what your politicized version of democracy looks like. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Ron Harris and I live in Miramonte Ranch neighborhood. I am an American of Greek descent. I am a member of a World War II Gold Star family. My father served the nation for 30 years as a career non-commissioned officer in the Air Force, and I lived that life right along with him. What does that have to do with the subject at hand? It has a lot to do with it, and let me explain. First of all, I come from a legacy of ancient and contemporary Greek people who in fact founded democracy. Plato wrote the Republic, Aristotle wrote the Ethics. And when you take the founding of democracy and you layer it onto architecture, in Greek architecture, when you think about the Pythagorean rule and the isosceles triangle, all the sides are equal in that triangle. Everything in the culture, in the architecture, in the foundation of democracy to this day has survived all those thousands of years. And I have a personal mission because of my legacy and my commitment to the nation and to my local government all the way down to speak and say that at this moment in time, I am here to support David Beacom for the position because I feel underrepresented, overlooked, and undervalued. I didn't have an opportunity to vote on who I wanted for mayor, as Nick mentioned. I don't have an opportunity to vote for who I want to now take the position that's vacated. That is not one man, one vote. That is not fair and equal representation. That runs counter to everything that the ancient and contemporary Greeks believed in the founding principles of democracy. David Beacon will fight for me. I don't live in his ward, but he will fight for me. He will fight so that government isn't going to tell me I can't go to church if I'm locked out of my church and locked away from being able to receive the sacraments from my minister, or that I'm not able to vote for the people that I want to represent me, or for some fair and balanced equilibrium, for what's reasonable and realistic. So I know that David will fight for me, and I support his candidacy. And I hope that all of you will renew and review your commitments to the principles of democracy and act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Regina Petramala. I'm a Colorado native. I've spent almost my whole life here. I'm 44 years old, with the exception of a little detour in Southern California for a few years. I currently live in McKay Landing, and I've been there since 2008. And thank you for this opportunity to speak this evening. I would like to first thank Nick, who spoke earlier. He punctuated a lot of different areas that a lot of Broomfield residents feel, which is that we are underrepresented a lot of times. I'd also like to thank the lovely lady, I apologize, I forgot her name, who just spoke so eloquently and passionately as well. I would just simply like to say there are a lot of Broomfield residents whose voices would like to be heard. We want to have an opportunity to select whom we want to represent us more fairly and more equitably. And I don't believe that is currently going on in the city of Broomfield. I think there are a lot of voices that would represent a more conservative values and viewpoint that I think should be more respected and heard. And that is simply all I want to say this evening, because I very much appreciate the two that have spoken prior to me, and that I also feel the way that they do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Neil Allaire. I live in Broomfield Heights, First Filing. Yeah, I guess that's why you guys just approved the ranked choice voting. And I just looked up, Eileen, you got 47% of the vote in a three-way race, which is pretty good. And I'll also say this is a similar, the exact situation that council was in 2015 when David was first appointed to council, the way you're appointing someone tonight. And about 6 months after he was appointed, he ran for office again. So it's a very similar situation we're looking at. He did run for re-election 2 years ago, and Heidi Hinkle say he ran for re-election after being on council for 4 or 5 years. And the members of Ward 5 got to see him in action, and they decided to vote for Heidi by a 20% margin. So there's democracy. Todd has lived here since 2014. He has quite a varied experience, including being on city council in Baldwin, Kansas, a much smaller town, but probably what Broomfield was like some time ago. And he's worked a lot in public service. He has a master's in public administration, and currently he's vice president at Regis University in Denver. And he's also on OSTAC here in Broomfield, so he's been involved in the local community through the city. He also is president of his PT, HOA. So he's been very involved in the community wherever he's lived, whether Kansas, other places around the country, and here for the last several years. So I really urge you to go really with the voters of Ward 5 who decided they did not want David Beacon to represent them 2 years ago, and vote for Todd. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? You can step in line, Mr. Robinson.
Good evening. Councilor Grayson Hoffer. I am a resident of Vista Highlands, Ward 5. So Mayor, council, staff, most importantly, thank you to the citizens of Broomfield who have shown up to be heard this evening. And thank you for allowing me just a couple of minutes to share my thoughts on what we are experiencing this evening. The applicants for the vacancy tonight are very different in nature and do require some consideration. The first of which is a concerned Broomfield citizen who became interested in Broomfield politics when a controversial development got him to start paying more attention to the activity before the council. He's to be commended for stepping up and should be considered just as much as any applicant. The next applicant is a man that has very applicable experience with this process and the business of being a council member. He was appointed a few years ago when there was a prior vacancy in this very ward. He was consequently appointed by the council, and he served out the interim of about 6 months before being elected in November of 2015. He served out his term and did so with honor and respect to this position, as well as to those who he served with. He knows the ins and the outs of city council and would provide the best transition possible for this interim position until the election in November. Which brings us to our third and final candidate, who is exactly that, a candidate in the upcoming election. He presumably entered the race to be voted in by the people and to represent their interests, not by force, but by a democratic process and the vote of the majority. But we've seen this play out, not only in our community, but in those communities around us as well. Aurora, Westminster, and now Broomfield. Elections are inherently American and are one of the most sacred acts we make as citizens. If we all believe in this principle and we hold election integrity up to the highest standard, then I say, let the people vote. With that said, there is only one choice here this evening, the reasonable choice, the rational choice, the ethical choice. I leave you with a quote from John Adams before you vote on your appointee this evening. Always vote for principle, though you may vote alone, and you may cherish the sweetest reflection that your vote is never lost. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for our city and county attorney, because there seems to be some misunderstanding about the process. We are governed by our charter, which requires us to fill these vacancies in this manner, correct?
Yes, that's correct, ma'am.
So we really don't have any choice but to make these appointments.
No, it's a shall in the charter.
That's what I thought. So just to be clear, this is what we have to do by the laws of the city and county of Broomfield. Seeing no further, oh, Mr. Robinson, I'm so sorry.
I really wasn't a comment today, but I really feel compelled to. Several years ago, I actively supported the appointment of a partisan candidate, a vacancy appointment for Ward 5. A young and up and coming person that looked like he had a lot of potential. At that time, the council had a different leaning, an opposite leaning, if you wish, more conservative, less progressive. And even though I knew all of those council members who could vote that person in their wisdom, they chose not to pick a partisan candidate. But I was somewhat chagrined at that time. And I thought, what the heck happened here? But they used common sense and they kept it simple. And they said, if we put a partisan candidate in there, that person, we're putting our foot on the scale, on the election scale. We're saying that's the person we want and sending a signal to the Broomfield voters, not letting them, you're biasing the decision. And I can tell you, I was not the supporter of David Beach. But David Beacom turned out to be a really solid council member. Worked hard, always came prepared. Participated on numerous commissions, extending Broomfield's influence out into the metropolitan area. And, highly competent individual. And in terms of keeping it simple, he's a natural plug to just plug in the slot in the near term. I do know that David did wind up with an edge in the upcoming election, and he was elected. So we really have proof there that putting your foot on the scale has an effect. And I encourage you to think about that and try to avoid that. You get your way no matter what. If the other person is the other candidate, or the other person you're considering is voted in by the electorate, fine. And David Beacom didn't do anything wrong in office. He was a highly successful council member who was caught up in the oil and gas zeitgeist. The anti-oil and gas zeitgeist. That's what swung this council, and you all know it. And who knows what will happen this time? That zeitgeist is not going to be there. It's going to be a different zeitgeist. More like the American Marxism zeitgeist. Okay? That's what we're facing in this upcoming election. So I would encourage you to rise above all that stuff. I mean, you're all highly competent people. I've watched you all. I don't necessarily agree with your decisions, but I do think you wind up making a decision based on good principles. So I say rise above this. Put David Beacom back in the office. He's fully competent. He's a natural plug. Get it done. Keep it simple.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Your time has expired. Next is public comment from individuals joining via phone. Please press *3, state your first and last name for the record. And we have Dana Innerfeld.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Dana.
Thank you. I am a Ward 5 resident and have lived in Broomfield about 14 years now, and was very excited when Guyleen Castriata ran for council as somebody who very much represented my views and where the direction that I wanted to see Broomfield going in, and very excited for Guyleen to now be mayor. Now that we have this vacancy of her city council seat, as a Ward 5 resident, my preference would be to have somebody in that seat who would be forwarding the views and the votes that Guyleen had been doing as a Ward 5 representative. So my request for the council is to appoint Todd Cohen to this role, as his views and positions most closely align with Guyleen based on, issues around sustainability, around progressive values and growth in our community. Having been a Ward 5 resident when David Beacom was council, and having contacted him with questions, the only response that I got as a woman, which that's at least what it felt like to me, was extremely patronizing, and that is not the type of person that I want to see again representing me. So since the voters voted for Guyleen and Todd most closely represents her views, I would think that he is the right fit in order to replace her in this council seat and forward the will of the voters, especially given that David Beacom was originally appointed to that seat in a similar situation to this, and then was never, was elected without any competition. So the first time that he had somebody run against him, he lost that seat. So it feels that the will of the voters, residents of Ward 5, would be to have somebody representing us that's more akin to the person that we elected. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Are there any more public comments? We will now proceed with council's vote to elect a council member for Ward 5. Please state the individual's name you were voting for when the clerk calls your name.
question?
Yeah.
Mrs. Mayor? I was not in the room during the last time we had this situation come up. Do we not have an opportunity to discuss?
Just like with boards and commissions and my mayoral appointment, we did not have discussion.
I understand that. I'm asking if there is a process that the charter speaks to anything.
It does not. Councilmember Law Evans and staff recommends that the council follow as close to the boards and commissions process, just for consistency.
I see. I wish we had this discussion before, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Anderson. Todd Cohen. Groom. David Beacom. Hinkle. Todd Cohen. Law Evans.
David Beacom.
Lim. Todd Cohen. Lindsted.
Mr. Cohen.
Sharp.
Todd Cohen.
That's 5 votes for Todd Cohen and 2 votes for David Beacom. Is there a motion to appoint Todd Cohen as council member for Ward 5? Councilmember Henkel?
Thank you. I move to, what is the word? Sorry. Appoint Todd Cohen for Ward 5. Thank you.
Mr. Cohen, would you like to come to the podium?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, there needs to be a second on that motion,
Oh,
please.
but you can still come. to the
Yes,
podium. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Schaaf. Mr. Cohen, would you please come to the podium? Do you accept the position?
Yes, I do.
Congratulations.
Mayor, there's a motion on the table to do the formal appointment, and there needs to be a vote. But I do think it was proper to make sure the candidate actually would be willing to accept the position.
I meant that. All right, so do we do a roll call vote? All in favor?
You can do it all in favor.
Okay, all in favor of Todd Cohen? It's unanimous. Any opposed? Okay, so that's done. And this is new. I apologize. I've never done this before. So we have that. And then it's unanimous. We accepted the position. Congratulations. Judge Amy Bachman is here to swear in the new council member. Judge Bachman. There.
I do solemnly swear or affirm
Do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution,
that I will support the Constitution,
the laws of the United States
the laws of the United States,
and of the state of Colorado,
and the state of Colorado,
the charter and ordinances of the city and county of Broomfield,
the charter and ordinances of the city and county of Broomfield,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
that I will faithfully perform the duties
of the office of city council member
of the office of city council member
to which I have been appointed.
to which I have been appointed.
Welcome. The city and county attorney's report is next. Ms. Rogers, do you have a report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't have a formal report. I'd just like to inform council that I will be out next week, and Pat Gilbert will be acting as city and county attorney and will be at the council meeting.
The city and county manager's report is next. Ms. Hoffman, do you have a report?
I do not, and I wish I was going with Nancy on vacation, but that will come soon. Thank you.
Thank you. There is no legislative update, business before the Broomfield Urban Renewal Authority or the Arista Local Improvement District Board of Directors, and no special reports this evening. Our final item this evening is a request from Councilmember Anderson to determine if council would like to direct staff to amend council's rules of procedure to address council members' use of social media. Council's consideration of this item is not on the merits or substance of potential changes. Rather, you'll be asked whether or not you support directing staff to research the issue, prepare a memo, and propose changes to council rules on this matter. for council's formal consideration. Councilmember Anderson, can you briefly summarize your request?
Thank you. Can I have like a couple minutes? Is that good? Okay, perfect. Okay, so, we received social media guidance from our previous city attorney, Sean Sullivan, under attorney-client communications, so I will not go into the details of that guidance. But as council members, we have all reviewed that document. The majority of the council is following the previously provided guidance, and it may be time to refresh that. Maybe that's not the right guidance. So, beyond guidance from a purely legal perspective, we do not have a policy or guidance for what is the acceptable use of social media. What we can legally do is different than what we should do, and that we determine is appropriate as a body. CIRSA, CML, and other organizations provide guidance online, including if multiple council members, 3 or more in our case, engage in an online discussion, it could be viewed as a meeting. Such posts should be considered part of the public record. Posting or engaging on council business may indicate a non-neutral stance from a decision maker, and that such articles indicate that it is important for cities and towns to adopt social media policies to support transparency and safeguard from unintended legal issues. Regardless of whether we create a formal policy or updated social media guidance, we need some type of discussion on our use of social media to avoid the recent pent-up frustration that played out on social media and resulted in many emails, phone calls, letters, and more to several council members from frustrated constituents. Concerns and reasons for discussion include feedback from many constituents, including the following. When only one member of council is active on social media, many assume that that post represents the views of the body. If others are not responding, and the reason most might not be responding is because they don't think that they should be. So we really need to get some guidance in that area. In some cases, the posts draw negative attention to council business, which gives the entire council a bad reputation. Posting about council business by a council member on social media can also confuse residents as to the position of all council members. Residents have interpreted some of the comments as an attempt to shame those who do not agree with the view presented. So these are the issues that we need to resolve. Additional considerations include understand that social media was not always available and that communication platforms change over time, and that some may still prefer to use official council emails, individual phone calls, public forums, and town halls for communication with our constituents. And we must factor in that social media only reaches some constituents. And it's essential that we have guidance on when these social media posts about city business would be detrimental to the ongoing discussions of city ordinances or confidential city negotiations. The same applies to one-on-one constituent emails, but becomes ever more dangerous when many more eyes are viewing the posts. Although emails to council are publicly accessible, it is evident that many do not believe it is appropriate for council members to decide which ones will only be accessed by council, and those reviewing the agenda item versus which should be highlighted on Facebook, Nextdoor, or other social media platforms. If our constituents want their emails posted on Nextdoor, they would post them there, and the fear of council members posting emails to council on social media platforms may result in constituents being reluctant to email their concerns, leads to intimidation. This behavior is disrespectful and unprofessional, and social media results in too much staff and council time being spent addressing constituent concerns. And then finally, all post content should reflect the level of professionalism that we as a council determine to be appropriate. So look forward to feedback from my colleagues as to whether they find value in directing staff to draft possible amendments to the council rules to address our use of social media, especially to provide clarity and consistency in our use. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. We will now proceed with public comments, starting with in-person public comment. Please come to the podium, state your name and neighborhood for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Nick Cleveland, Broadway again. Thank you very much for allowing this public comment. I completely agree with Councilmember Anderson. I think that staff should look over this, and I would love to be a part of the conversation. While Councilmembers Anderson and Councilmember Henkel were both employees of Logic, they were some of the most visceral users of social media in all of Broomfield, and I have hundreds of screenshots. Please have us be a part of this conversation as you're putting forth these policies. I would welcome the opportunity to be a part of that conversation and help shape that policy for the elected representatives of Broomfield and their behavior on social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone else have public comment?
Hi, my name is Heather and I'm a member and a resident in Ward 5. And Councilmember Anderson, thank you so much for bringing this to council's attention. Just wanted to point out that there recently was a lot of hate thrown towards my church, Flatirons Church, by Councilmember Henkel, and that church actually was just vandalized this weekend. And I just feel like it's completely inappropriate to have those discussions, hating on certain churches and bashing them on social media in a public forum. And it does to us feel like that is how the council feels, because when one voice is really loud, that's the one that is being heard. So I really encourage you to look into this and to hear everybody else's voices on this, because it's just very inappropriate and unprofessional. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to comment? Are you going, Mr. Robinson?
Marty Robinson, again, standing up unexpectedly. I didn't expect this topic, so. I would really caution the council about tampering with social media. As rough as it is, it's about freedom of speech. That's the First Amendment in our Constitution. Life is rough these days, but get up. It's tough, stop trying to make life easy. Stay out of it. Just let it rip. And it'll all work out. America's a great country. Built on a great foundation. We're a highly successful country, no matter what people say. Start believing it. So, if you're thin-skinned, too bad. Life is rough.
Thank you.
Regina Petramala again from McKay Landing, Ward 5. I would simply like to just ask that discretion is used when social media is utilized. I would also ask that the council members take into consideration when members of the community have something that they would like to say in email and email to the council members, that those emails not be reposted on a social media website. Yes, I realize that information can be accessed by anyone, and that is totally fine, but done so in the proper way and not posted on a social media website. Most recently, Heidi Hinkle did choose to post something that was written to the council member. That individual, which was not me, did not expect their written statement to the council via email to be shared publicly on social media. So I would ask that discretion be used and that any emails that are received do not be reposted on social media. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll now proceed. We'll start with questions from comments from City Council. Remember, this is on whether or not to direct staff to work on this request. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Due to some of the comments tonight, I just wanted to make sure I set the record straight. I want to address the issue of Flatirons Church, and I asked for light to be shown on the non-clarity of women in leadership, as they do not let women be lead pastors in the church. So it looks like hate to you seems really unreal, considering the hate of those who are LGBTQ as well, who are not allowed to be Bible study leaders as well. So that's part of the clarity. According to the emails, particularly issues coming up on future agenda items, are public. They have always been, and elected officials do shine a light on some emails. This is not new, nor is it news. Senator Brittany Patterson, for instance, has done this recently. The list is very long. I also wanted to add that there were no disparaging remarks made towards this anonymous person who anonymously emailed council. So I just want to thank you all for this conversation, but I also want to send caution to the wind, because if this request is approved, where will it end? If we began to police each other without any actual consequences, where does it end? Do we police dais behavior, for instance? When I have absolutely no dog in this fight, if we receive complaints about a city council member who turns their back in their chair in the official dais and it lands in the news, are we going to police this? There is no law against this, and I do not wish to police this. How about behavior that stirs the pot on social media? If a council member talks with a law enforcement officer and that conversation ends up stirring controversy elsewhere on social media, causing staff to work through the weekend, are we going to add more staff time towards policing that behavior? There is no law against this, and I do not wish to police this. Are we policing those who don't use social media, which could end up in other city council members having to step up more publicly, who are more publicly available and do the work of other council members? I don't want to police that. Something else to consider. If I hadn't posted on social media about the email I received from a man out of Aurora who sent me a veiled gun threat, then I don't know if 9 News would have ever known to connect his email with similar threatening emails the very same man sent to Tri-County Health. This person could continue the abuse behind closed doors. If we start initiating policies on social media behavior, will abuse from anonymous people happen behind closed doors? And where will these policies stop? I think we can utilize taxpayer money on the issues that matter the most to them, and policing what is completely unenforceable isn't the solution. And I do look forward to meeting with Councilmember Anderson. I have asked for a meeting next week on this, the week following. And I am more than willing to have this discussion, but to put policy in place where it's completely unenforceable is ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll be brief. I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Robinson, actually. Our own social media presence is our own prerogatives, and, that's between us and the voters, and I don't see much reason for rules to come into play. We can make our own choices, and we signed up to do this, so I don't want to see this request move forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a delicate First Amendment issue, as Mr. Robinson and Councilmember Lindstedt have pointed out. And I once heard a quote that America is based on freedom from and freedom to, and the delicate balance that lies between. And I agree, there is a very delicate balance here. However, with the rise of so-called cancel culture and doxing I'm a lurker on social media. I don't get into it much. And I'm not on Facebook at all. I don't even know where these things were happening. But I have heard from individuals that they were afraid of the social media mob. And yes, it's one thing for council members to act in certain ways and have our behavior criticized or what have you. That's absolutely, that is what we signed up for. And I'm the one who turned the chair, by the way, because we were told, council was told, this is now 3 years ago or something like that, to grow some by a constituent. And I felt that was incredibly misogynistic. And the next time he came up to speak, I turned my chair. And he actually has been very well behaved ever since. So perhaps that was successful. But my constituents are ultimately responsible for holding me accountable. I get that. However, there's this thing about, and I did see the emails go by, and I was contacted by the resident whose email was reposted on social media, and that I can't get through that that's okay. I just can't get to the point where that's okay. Yes, it's public. Absolutely, it's public. But there is an expectation, I believe, that conversations held with council members will not then necessarily be broadcast to the entire world, where there's this flattening of humanity on social media, where we are seen as two-dimensional creatures, and you're either for us or against us, rather than sitting down. And I respect Councilmember Hinkle's attempt to, request to meet with Councilmember Anderson on this, where a face-to-face conversation, someone would never say that to your face, right? It wouldn't happen. But this flattening on social media is not okay. I disagree with it vehemently. And I do think we do have rules and procedures that we take into account. We do have rules and procedures that council is expected to abide by. To the best of my knowledge, since we put rules and procedures in place, we've never had anyone violate them and be sanctioned, but that is the enforcement if a council member violates our own rules and procedures. I can't remember that ever happening in 7.5 years. Maybe it has, maybe it happened before then, but I am wholeheartedly in support of this discussion going forward, because social media is a tool. And just like I worship at Flatirons Church too, and just like the tool where someone took that spray paint or that crowbar and busted the windows and painted the side of the building with some really weird things, honestly, if I read them correctly. That's a tool that can be used for good. Spray paint can paint your car, or it can paint nasty things on the side of the building. Social media is a tool, right? Social media can use to connect me to my high school classmate that lives in Washington State that I haven't seen since high school, or it can be used to mobilize people in this vicious flattening response. And I'm not okay with that. I think we do need to have social media policies. So I'm sorry, that was a long-winded speech. I didn't mean it to be, but I am in support of Councilman. Yes, I did. Who am I kidding? I didn't mean it to be, but I am in support of Councilmember Anderson's request. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lyons. And I know I did request that we just do an up or down, do we want to move this forward? But because I do believe in free speech and I don't want to restrict it, I'm going to let people talk. So, Councilmember Groom.
Thank you. I do want to move this forward, and I'll make it short. We do have a code of conduct already established, and I think we just need to revisit it, make sure that we do have social media incorporated in our code of conduct. And we're all abide by it. We are elected officials. We should be held at a little higher level. We've already established that within our code of conduct. So we'll review it, make sure that social media code of conduct is incorporated, and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Grimm. Would the rest of the council like to weigh in? Thank you, Councilmember Lim.
I do support the staff researching this subject further, and so that we can review our current, our lack of social media policy and see if anything needs to be adopted in our code of ethics.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
I've been here all of 10 seconds, and I've considered this for about 5, since I didn't know it was coming, but I just wanted to make a brief comment to make note that if we are concerned about public speech, it should be we should consider total conduct and not narrow it to social media. Social media is a private corporation. This is not the public square. They govern themselves. If we violate the rules of their platform, they can kick us off, and there's nothing to do about it. There is a difference, I think, between a social media policy for an employee and an elected official. For an employee, it is their people who hired them. For an elected official, the accountability is the public square, and the voters can hold them accountable for how they behave or what they say or don't say on any platform, whether it's at this dais or whether it's on social media. I think we're walking down a dangerous slope to try and suggest that there is some kind of restriction on opinions expressed in the public square. I'm certainly open to looking at a code of conduct in general, but I think it's basically up to the council to govern its own members if they wish to, and it's up to the public to hold the members accountable if they don't agree with what they said or do. That's my 10-second thought, but I would hope, I didn't catch all of Councilmember Anderson's proposal. It sounded like it was narrowly focused to social media. I would prefer it was more widely focused in conduct in general.
Thank you. Councilmember Straub.
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you to Councilmember Anderson for bringing this section 18 forward. Just as we did recently, I think it is wise that we update our rules and procedures to ensure we are staying current with our business conduct. Councilmember Anderson, you said something that that struck me is that we need to review the social media section of our current rules and procedures, and I think that is proper to continue to update our rules and procedures if we do need to in this realm. But I really don't think that, one of the things that the mayor said was, directing staff to put together a memo for our future study session. I really don't want staff time to be dedicated to putting together a memo on this which is really just a council conversation. So I would like to ensure that staff time is not, being allocated to put together a memo for this conversation. But at the end of the day, I really don't think that this is the proper way to deal with this issue at hand. We look at, really the policy that we have in place right now, the social media policy. And that is, when making public statements, it is appropriate for council members to use social media to explain their position. However, council members should refrain from using social media to undermine the body by criticizing other council members and staff for their position or votes on matters before council. So perhaps that needs to be expanded or further defined. But I think that it comes back to enforcement of our rules and procedures, and what are we going to do to actually enforce any of our rules and procedures. And that has been a sticking point for at least 3.5 years that I've been on council. So I think that we have to address that piece if we're actually going to write anything else into our ethics and our code of conduct. So that's all I have. Thanks.
So is that a yes?
That's a no.
Okay, thank you, because I saw it. Okay, so, there is consensus to move forward with the council members present that I could tell. Did you get the same?
If we could have clarification, that would be great.
Okay, can you track it if we do a roll call? Can you do a roll call, please? Okay, thank you.
Cohen.
No.
Anderson.
Yes.
Groom.
Yes.
Hinkle.
No.
Law Evans.
Absolutely.
Lim.
Yes.
Lindstedt.
No.
Schaff.
No.
It's 4-4, Mayor.
May I ask our city and county attorney a question? I really do wonder about the First Amendment area here and restricting our rights. I do want you to elaborate a little bit on how this is kind of going down a slippery slope of limiting and restricting speech.
Sure, I'll give a very general overview. I mean, as elected officials, you still retain all your First Amendment rights, all your free speech rights as citizens of the country and residents of this community. So you do have all those constitutional privileges, and they should not be infringed on by the government, just like any other person. Your own rules, depending on the enforcement mechanism, could be seen as an infringement of that speech. So I would agree that you should be careful in this regard. That being said, across the nation, we have seen elected bodies address issues of conduct related to social media, use of the information they have, restrictions on using social media, while also providing other opportunities for the council members to have the opportunity to freely speak on matters. So yes, there are First Amendment considerations, and there is also a way to address rules of conduct for elected bodies in this regard that have withstand challenges. That wasn't very helpful. I think.
Here's my quandary, because if I say no, well, that's kind of a restriction of the conversation and the speech that some of us want to have this conversation. But then if I say yes, then I kind of feel like I'm promoting the limitation of speech.
I think this is not about overall speech. This is a request by a council member to have staff work on a specific topic. So if I could ride on the coattails of Councilmember Schaaf's comments, it would be considering the workload of staff. Would you want staff to look at this now? Is there other options that council can address this, like at a focus session? Because what staff would do is research what other municipalities and counties have done and present that to you to decide what do you want to say in your own regulations for each other. So there could be other options. So I respectfully don't believe that if you decided, for those of you who are not supporting this tonight, I don't believe that
got to vote on restricting speech. Either way.
That was good. Thank you. That helps. My preference would be for us to handle this among ourselves at a focus session and not devote already stretched out staff resources to getting in the middle of arguments. So I'm going to say no. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I am at a loss at this point in time because we were given guidance. Does the guidance stand prior to your time here on city council? Because the guidance isn't, we cannot follow that guidance and stay, and we can't discuss that guidance. So what are we to do? Do we all just skip following the guidance? I don't know how to move forward at this point in time because we have, I went over some of these issues that do occur in the real world where the issues over the potential for opening these core requests and public records and the system CML memos. Is it just a free for all then, or I don't see how we can move forward with the lack of guidance, but yet prohibitive guidance. I'm not sure, and I suppose we'll see how this works in the public realm and just continue the path we're on, but if we want to open it to a wider realm, as Councilmember Cohen had stated, that, look at our council procedures in general, that's also an option. But if otherwise, I will leave it up to the constituents to continue on the path we're on. So thank you.
Councilmember Schaaf and Lyman.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think that it is a great question that Councilmember asked, how do we move forward? And I think that we were given that guidance document by our previous city and county attorney, Sean Sullivan, which was a great comprehensive document for us all to look at, especially regarding social media use. I do ask a question of our current city and county attorney for a conversation that is delving into this issue of council conduct. Is this a city and county business matter? That if we were to discuss in groups of larger than 3 people or say even 6 people, would this be considered, would this need to be an open meeting or considered an open meeting or a posted meeting in order to have this conversation, which is regarding council conduct and council issues?
That's a good question, Councilmember Schaaf. Yes, if more than 2 council members were to get together to discuss this topic, it should be noticed and open to the public.
So I think that, with that, it probably does, we do need to have some type of focus issue. I think this is an issue that has come before us, not only from our public, from different conversations within council. This is something that we should talk about, address, so that we can move on as a cohesive body. So I would suggest that we have some type of focus session that council is just able to discuss and talk about this. I don't know if staff needs to be involved much in that conversation. I really don't want staff to put together a memo, but I think that we do need to address this issue that is a concern of our residents as well as within our council. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Law Evans.
Councilmember Schaaf, I sure appreciate how you have a way of distilling things. I appreciate that very much. So I would like to volunteer and suggest to work with Councilmember Anderson. If our attorney, Ms. Rogers, would kindly send that memo out once again. Here's the 2 steps that I will agree to take in this matter, because it does seem like it is a matter. I would like to work with Councilmember Anderson to not use staff time, but for she and I to do a survey of what other municipalities in the area, in the state do, what their policies look like. But then I would also invite, there've been a lot of people talk in the public, and I'd like to invite you. I will, as long as our policies are public, and they are, I will email you that document. And if you think that there are specific provisions of that document that have been, what's the word I'm looking for? Violated, breached, something like that, then let's have that conversation. My email is on the city website. Email me directly. Just let me know what we're talking about. But let's look at that document and see if you feel that there are specific provisions that any council member has violated, let's have that discussion, because it is, if there are already violation, well, whatever the word is, if that document has not been adhered to, it is our responsibility to have that discussion with other council members, as well as when time comes to be held accountable by constituents, for that to happen as well. But that's my suggestion right now, is that if Councilmember Anderson is willing, she and I can work on that together. And then, Ms. Rogers, if you'd send that document to me once more, I will happily disseminate it to anyone who asks, or anyone who emails Ms. Rogers. It's a public document. And you don't like that idea.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Thank you, Mayor. We already took a straw poll. Why are we having this discussion right here, right now? Is this, or should we be doing this, Attorney Rogers?
Councilmember Lindstedt, your rules, not to be flippant, do not really address that. And it would be up to the chair to limit discussion. Madam Mayor, I do need to make a clarifying point. The memo you're referencing, Councilmember Law Evans, is an attorney-client privilege memo. We can remove what the legal advice is, but I also want to point out that that document was guidance, and it is not.
I'm sorry, let me clarify.
Yeah.
I'm actually talking about our current rules and procedures.
We can send
And no, the guidance document, I understand, is attorney-client privilege, and I would not want to even discuss broaching that, but I'd like to know if there are rules and procedures. I'd like to have that discussion, and if it's not, I respect Councilmember Lindstedt and your question, but the chair gave me the floor, so I wanted to make those suggestions. So that's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Let it be noted, the chair believes in free speech. Councilmember Grimm.
I just want to make, I have one question and one point. What is a focus session? We've never had one.
We did, we had one in January.
Well, yeah, that
Not one
was,
in, we're supposed to have one in late summer, so we can add it into our summer, whatever.
oh, so it would just be on one of our days that we take. Okay, so we would still post it.
That's what I thought.
Okay. I thought it was something new that I didn't know about.
Yeah, we're saying it's like
Okay.
the retreat.
The retreat thing. Okay, perfect. And then I think since we're all up here having so much conversation, it just stands to say that we need to talk more about it. This was supposed to be a yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down, and anytime we vote on an 18A and our discussions can't stop, it proves that we need to talk more about it. So I still think we need a study session. And I really appreciate the council members that want to step up and volunteer so we don't lose staff, but staff to me is that independent, non-biased review that have access to other cities and counties that can get that information fairly quickly. So I'd more appreciate staff bringing that information to me. And that's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Grimm. All right, so that's a wrap on that, I guess.
Can you summarize, Mayor?
Yeah, absolutely. We're kind of divided here on this, whether or not we should devote our staff resources, which I know we have like so many things in the pipeline already. And I just feel like this doesn't rise to the level of, moving something that's critical out of the way. So the majority of us decided to address this at our next council focus session, which I believe is August. When are we doing that? Date to be determined?
Yes.
That works, okay, but we do have one coming out. So we'll add this in, and we do. I mean, it's, to be honest, it's been hard because this council went remote just a couple of months after being sworn in. We didn't have the in-person interaction. We didn't have the time to learn to work together and to build trust and relationships. And that's one of the sad things that happened because of the pandemic and having to work electronically. And I hope that it gets better. Because face-to-face communications and in-person communication is so different. It's way more genuine when you see people as human beings. As somebody from the audience said, or no, actually it was you, the two-dimensional anonymity that people have behind social media, that I think it's not a good thing all the time. So let's try to do better. And hope I didn't pontificate too much. Moving on to the end. Is there any other business to come before council? There being no further business? Oh,
There's a request for 2 persons to appear at the study session, the special study session that we got on Monday. You will find it on the script.
did you just type that in?
No.
Hold on. I skipped past it, didn't I? Before we adjourn this evening, a study session was added on Monday, July 19th at 6 p.m. to continue timely discussions on the American Rescue Plan Act and homelessness. When the clerk notified council of the additional meeting, Councilmember Henkel and Councilmember Tessier requested council permit them to attend electronically. Mayor Pro Tem Jezierski also requested later to join virtually. And since Councilmember Cohen is new, are you going to be able to attend the Monday, June 19th? July 19th study session, so you don't need to be virtual. So we have, we're going to have to require that council agree to suspend the current rules to permit their electronic attendance at the July 19th study session. Is there a motion to approve this request? Councilmember Evans?
So
The motion is that Mayor Pro Tem Jezierski and council members Henkel and Tessier be permitted to attend the meeting on July 19th electronically. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Grimm. All in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Now, there being no further business